here from Aixiom Education. Today we're going to talk about an example question that came out this year, this summer assessment. Basically, the final question, a 20-mark question, discuss whether expenditure reducing policies are preferable to expenditure switching policies in order to correct a persistent deficit on the current account of a balance of payments. And we're going to analyze the 20 marks, right? We're going to talk about how to get the best results from this. So let's talk about it. So right now there's an essay plan being created for reference. And if you look at this plan, it has AO1, AO2, and AO3, right? Well, we're going to begin with the definitions. And then we're going to begin talking about the argumentation that we're going to put up to answer this question, right? For example, like what is a contractionary fiscal monetary policy, consumption, investment, basically the components of aggregate demand, how it influences on the demand side, and how it influences the output of the economy. And then we're going to talk about how it actually impacts upon the trade deficits and trade surpluses and the current account. We're going to define expenditure reducing mechanism and as well as expenditure switching mechanism. Switching includes devaluation, relative price switch, and we're going to talk about the Marshall-Lerner condition as well. Then we're going to have evaluations, right? The cost of expenditure reducing, conflict of objectives, what happens when we have income elasticity, price elasticity involved, and for example, like let's see if the problems that we have are purely on the demand side, because we could have solved it with the supply side policies as well. So these are the kind of thinking that is required to solve a 20-mark question in this regard. So I have an exemplar answer here. This is the full answer to get a 20 marks, full marks on the exam. And first of all, I would like to mention that this answer is a bit long. It's around 900 words. So I think for this particular question, you should be able to get rid of the J curve and just make a one sentence description of how that J curve works and how the Marshall-Lerner condition is being involved here. Most of the time, just put the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves in the long run, aggregate supply curves, and also the devaluation mechanism, right? So increasing the supply of the currency and lowers the exchange rate. And yeah, I think this is what you need to do for a full answer, and let's walk it through. So full answer is going to be like, first of all, we need to define the key items of the question. The current account of balance of payments, right, records trading goods and services, primarily income and secondary income. A persistent deficit therefore means that year after year the value of imports and income outflows exceeds the value of exports and income inflows. So like at this point, you need to be very clear that this is not like a temporary thing. It's not like, okay, there's a macroeconomic event causing a shock on the demand side or the supply side of goods and services that being internationally traded. It's a persistent macroeconomic phenomenon that we need to grapple with. And then we have expenditure reducing policies, including contractionary fiscal and monetary policies, taxes, rate hikes, and all kind of stuff that correct the deficit by lowering aggregate demand and hence total national spending, of which imports are a part. Quite devastating, right? And you can mention the negative implications of this, right? And expenditure switching policies instead alter the relative price of domestic foreign goods, trying to make domestic goods more appealing to the international market, trying to use tariffs to make sure that the imports are more expensive. So this is expenditure switching policies that we're talking about. We are basically defining the key terms. Then we're trying to explain, right? Expenditure reducing works through the income mechanism, right? For example, like I'm increasing the borrowing cost, I'm increasing the income tax, I'm increasing the national procurement, for example. Aggregate demand shifts to the left, income shifts to the left, and therefore the import demand is a positive function of national income. The fall in Y multiplied by the marginal propensity to import produces the fall in import expenditure, and the current account improves. There is a second slower channel. The lower price level improves the country's price competitiveness abroad, raising export volumes over time. So I think in order to get a high mark, you also need to identify the secondary effects of a proposed policy change. So I think this is extremely important for you to mention. And this is a diagram. Like, make sure that the diagrams are labeled. Please label the diagrams. I will personally say you put a zero here, but um, it's not necessary. But please put the label here and try to do some signposting as to what each coordinate is representing, so the examiner can be uh, I don't know what to say, but like they can be notified as to the processes and the mechanisms in a diagram so that they can give you the marks easier. So like in CIE examination sessions, I think the examiners are very sentimental. Like if they see a crappy diagram, they give you a low mark because they have so many exams um, to mark, and I think it is extremely important for you to please the senses of the examiner to try to make sure that the graphs are being coherently represented to the examiner. Um, and then we talk about expenditure switching policies works instead through the substitution mechanism, right? We're trying to change the relative prices between domestic goods and foreign competition. So under a fixed or managed regime, the authorities, this is a very college level expression, like a fixed or managed regime for foreign currency regime. The authorities can devalue the currency, right? In figure two, lowering the peg rate from, wow, this is getting to the floating exchange rate versus fixed exchange rate regime. Lowering the peg rate from E1 to E2 and supplying domestic currency onto the market to defend a new parity. Exports now cost foreign buyers less in their own currency, while imports cost domestic residents more. So customers substitute towards domestically produced goods, and foreign demand for export rises. So basically, this is trying to change the relative prices between goods and services to make sure that more goods are being produced domestically and there is more export demand to improve the current account, provide a Marshall Lerner condition holds. This is the sum of the price elasticity of demand for exports and for imports exceeds one. Oh, you can talk about, for example, like how the Marshall Lerner condition doesn't work that way exactly. You can do a little bit of extra research because like this kind of math, if you really ask an economics professor, they will basically laugh at this. So I think you can just basically do extra research as to the validity of Mount Marshall Lerner condition being applied at an A level econ level. Um, since only then does the volume response outweigh the adverse change in terms of trade, tariffs and export subsidies achieve the same switching effect through policy created price bridges rather than through the exchange rate. So basically, an exchange rate analysis that you'll learn from textbook, just put it right there, and it'll give you the AO1, AO2 marks easily. The decision objection to expenditure reducing, this is getting basically like a case against the policies, right? So like in some scenarios, if you want to do this, like you need to answer the question, why do you need the current account to improve? Obviously, you need more goods and services to be employed in your domestic arena. But at the same time, you're asking a question like whether or not decreasing your aggregate demand is really going to be good to the economy. So this is kind of stuff that you can mention, right? A deficit should move at the cost of lower real GDP, shows with output falling below the full employment level, rising cyclical unemployment, and clear conflict of macroeconomic objectives. So yeah, this is kind of like a problem, right? Whereas the size of the sacrifice depends on income elasticity of demand for imports, blah, 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 blah. And this is very important, where a country imports mainly essentials, fuel, food, and capital equipment and components used as inputs into domestic manufacturing. This is very important. Like what happened during the first Trump administration was they added a bunch of tariffs and the trade deficit didn't go down because like America is very dependent upon foreign imports for their manufacturing business. And if you're just adding tariffs brainlessly, and you're gonna have some kind of bad phenomenon that you need to grapple with. Some horrible economic indicators that you need to bite, because sometimes like the trade deficit actually goes up because you're so dependent upon foreign imports. So tariffs may not be the best solution in every scenario. Then we're going to talk about expenditure switching policies, however, carries offsetting weakness of its own. If the Marshall Lerner condition is not met in the short run, and typically it's not because existing contracts are priced in advance and buyers take time. So, yeah, I think this is a very important point for you to bring up, because, like, when we talk about like very ideal economic models that simply do not capture the reality that we're living in. For example, like we have contracts that are signed beforehand. Same thing as the mortgage rates, right? I mean, mortgage rates tend not to move with the interest rate because a lot of the mortgage rates are being priced beforehand, before like 30 years before the change in the federal rate. So you can mention that in your essay as well. So there's a time difference there, and sometimes economic models cannot um, um, grapple with all the problems in the economy. And and then we can see valuations also self undermining over a longer horizon. Dearer imported raw materials and energy rates firms' cost of production, this will actually increase your deficit, right? Because your products are no longer competitive towards the international market, and people could have just switched to lower priced products from other countries because they don't have the kind of tariffs on those imported imports. And this is the like the kind of stuff that you need to mention in the exam. The deeper point is that both approaches are demand side responses to what a question describes as a persistent deficit. Yeah, I think like this is an important question that you can elaborate upon. You can bring up examples. I think the way to improve this exemplar essay is to include examples. um, I think you should include the problems with the American manufacturing business. I think the problem is not with the tariffs and the NAFTA agreement or the WTO. It's more like the labor productivity problem in the United States have been slipping so freaking hard. And you can talk about, for example, the problems with the unions and the problems with productivity and regulations, state, local, and federal regulations that are undermining the productivity of labor and productivity of capital. And you can mention that and say like, hey, we need some structural reforms in order to boost our competitiveness in the international market, to increase the long run aggregate supply. And this is what essentially that needs to be done. And I think this is very important. And then it's like expenditure switching is generally preferable to expenditure reducing because it corrects the external imbalance without deliberately destroying output employment. But yes, we're going to talk about Marshall Lerner condition, um, whether or not it's being met, right? I think there can also be a discussion as to whether or not the Marshall Lerner condition learned in A level economics textbook is actually correct, because I think the professors are going to look at this like, nah, man, like Marshall Lerner condition is a little bit more complicated than that. And then we're talking about expenditure reducing becomes the better choice in a specific case where a deficit coexists with an overheating economy and an accelerating inflation, since there's a contraction of demand serves two objectives simultaneously and its unemployment cost is small. Yes, we need to identify scenarios where expenditure reducing can be a viable option. So it's all about evaluation and critical thinking, I would say. It is not technically a sophisticated question. You just have to remember the facts well from the textbook and try to use them well and use examples and trying to be critical to whatever that's up there and trying to build a solid evaluation. And you can easily get 20 marks, at least 15 out of 20, very easily, and get an A star in economics. Try to be aware of the time, and sometimes, for example, like this is not essential. I'm doing this for a heuristic purpose. You can just get rid of this part and put up one paragraph or one sentence description of how the J curve works, and you will be fine. Thank you for listening, and don't hesitate to contact Aixiom Education for more information about sessions and courses. And thank you for listening. Thank you.